and lots of scholars were involved, and okay, that's great, but I can see denominations doing this, but it would just be really weird if Rich and I decided to put out a new creed, on Christology or something, or salvation or whatever. I mean, writing books, whatever, but this is really laid out in the classical historical format that was used by churches, and in the ancient world by the church at large, and then in modern times, Eastern Orthodoxy moved away from anything like this as far as really specific creedal stuff goes, but in the history of the West, you've got all sorts of stuff like this. Now, there were books of theology, Turretin's work, not the modern Turretin fan, but the real guy long ago. It's just one example of answering a question we affirm the Socinians deny, we affirm the Papists deny, and that kind of thing. Very, very common. Again, a very useful way of teaching. But it was sort of odd that a ministry would take it upon itself to produce something like this rather than a particular denomination, or even a seminary representing a denomination. I could sort of see that, but it did strike me as a little strange at that point. But in general, I have very positive response to it, for the simple reason that almost any investment of energy that will cause people to look to important things, foundational things, is to be commended these days. I mean, let's be honest. Isn't it? Now this is one of those places, by the way, where my unscrupulous viewers, and particularly the one particular Muslim, who watches all of this and hence will be accountable someday before God for everything that he's ever heard, which is an amazing thing to consider. They will take a section like what I'm about to give, and they'll isolate it and put some kind of a wild topic line on it that doesn't have almost anything to do with what I was actually saying. So I thought it'd be good for me to throw it in there. So if it does end up happening that way, I can always say, this is what I said right before that. But it is an indication of the health, or lack thereof, of the modern believing church. I don't know what word to use anymore, because evangelical means nothing today. It just doesn't. So when I say believing church, I mean people who actually believe that God has spoken, he's given us his word, and what the word says is true. It is an indication of the health or lack thereof of that church, that the vast majority of our people, this statement and its articles would be wildly educational. Wildly educational. And some of the criticisms of the article would not even be understood by many people reading it, because they're not familiar enough with Christology as a whole to even have a position. For example, one of the criticisms, and I sort of caught this too before I read the criticism article. One of the criticisms had to do with the issue of impeccability. Now, just out of complete honesty, just complete honesty, And don't feel like anyone's putting you down. That's why I say what's neat about this is it's educational. It helps to raise these issues. But if I said, I don't get the feeling that that impeccability is a central issue here, or it's even being affirmed, or even being raised, and it's really important to Christology, would you know what I was referring to? Would you know what I was referring to? I would like to say that something like that in this field of Christology is far more important to introduce believers to than the vast majority of what we do introduce new believers to, which is much more of a self-help methodology type thing than it is a grounded theological understanding of who Christ is and so on and so forth. So impeccability is the question that I remember in Bible college. And it was in Bible college, for I actually had to deal with it. I was raised in a Christian church. I had never heard anybody talk about it, at least not that I could remember. Maybe it was. I didn't understand. I don't know. Could Jesus sin? And I've told the story before. I still remember to this day when I came to a conclusion on this, and I've never found any reason to doubt the conclusion I came to. But it was in D.C. Martin's Christian Doctrines class at Grand Canyon College, now Grand Canyon University. And we had discussed it in class, and I was weighing it in my mind, and some of us Bible students had gone to the bookstore. And it was in the old Grand Canyon bookstore, which I can guarantee you is not there anymore, given what they're doing to that campus. It's probably a 10-story building now. All of a sudden it struck me. I had listened to the arguments. The argument being, on the one side, God cannot sin and remain God, because it is a fundamental violation of his nature. But man, if he does not have the ability to sin, is no longer man. So how could Jesus be the God-man? And just right there in the bookstore, I came to a conclusion on it, and I've never changed my mind. And my conclusion was that it is significantly more definitional, centrally definitional, foundationally definitional of the nature of God to not be able